Hey boos, in this video, I give commentary based on my opinion. Nothing is to be taken as factual. We are just here to have conversation. We don't expose and we don't sip tea on this channel. I'm giving you real talk straight, no chaser. Let's see if you can handle it.
Cause I'm a boss. I haven't done anything for you to be proud of.
Of course you have. You are marrying a man who can support you.
Hi tribe, it's Yoni and I'm back with another video. In today's video, I wanted to talk about this woman by the name of Kendra who is going viral for all the wrong reasons. And people are hyping her up in her comment section. Well, they were before she turned them off on her TikTok about this story about how she fell in love with her psychiatrist. And I have to share this because we are in this reckoning of the wounded feminine and things are being exposed that truly need to be addressed. And it's imperative that because of this reckoning that we truly are getting all sides of a story and all sides of a situation before we give our opinion or before we dox and ruin a person's career, reputation, and livelihood. You know how we like to do it over here. Let's get into this shadow work story time. So meet Kendra. She is from Tucson, Arizona. She was diagnosed at the age of 21 with ADHD. She is now a life coach where she helps others with ADHD and she helps them to build the life of their dreams. She has a coaching program and she recently decided to come out and share her story about how she fell in love with her psychiatrist.
I fell in love with my psychiatrist and he knew and he kept me until I had the strength to leave after 4 years. Here it is, part 1. So I decided to go back on ADHD meds after many years of being off of them. I was on them in my early 20s to help me get through college. And then I went off of them because they just weren't the side effects were too much over the benefits. But then in my late 20s, I read this book, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD, and it absolutely changed my life. For my fellow ADHDers, there's so many good things in here. And the biggest thing that I took away was that it's very important for ADHDers to be on meds. So I decided to make an appointment with a psychiatrist. I just Googled psychiatry in the city that I lived in, and I went with the first one that came up, and I got an appointment within a month. And then I booked a 90-minute intake and I show up to the intake and this man is my age and I can't help but notice that he's pretty attractive, this psychiatrist. I fell in love with my psychiatrist and he kept me anyway, part 2. So in this intake, I kind of clocked that he was attractive and my age, but when I tell you that I've had a lot of couch time in my life, a lot of therapy, I just went right into it. I trusted him enough, of course, why wouldn't I, to tell him about my childhood trauma, my daddy issues, if you will, what I had went through, all of the relationship trauma that I had. I was 6 months sober at this time, but all of the drinking and substance use I used to do, and he just listened and nodded. And that's the thing about psychiatrists, is that they're good at pretending to listen. They can appear connected, but that doesn't mean that they're always connected. So I just felt really seen. And I also told him, I was like, look, I don't want to be on stimulant meds. So he listened to me and he put me on the non-stimulant ADHD med at the lowest dose just to figure out if it was going to work for me.
I was in love with my psychiatrist and he kept me anyway, part 3. So I hadn't ever seen a psychiatrist before. When I was on meds in my early 20s, I only got meds from my primary care physician. So I didn't understand how psychiatry works. So because he was figuring out my med dose, I saw him every month, and he just made me feel like I was his friend. He was really, really funny and cracked jokes and told me he was impressed with my running that I would do. And yeah, so of course I loved the attention that I got from him. And it was in my third session with him, because at this point we were all on Zoom, that I asked him, I said, "Hey, do you mind if I call you by your first name?" And he's Pakistani, so I said his first name wrong. And he said, "Well, it's pronounced this, but yes, of course you can." And he seemed so smug and happy with himself. And I know that that is because that was his first sign that him pretending like we're friends was working. And to be fair to me, I had only ever been to therapy before. I didn't realize that, it's important to call your doctor last name. I mean, I did know that. I did it with all my other doctors, but it just showed that the boundaries were blurring, and he liked that. So from then on, from my third session on, I started calling him his first name. And then he just started turning up the volume on us being friendly. And he would ask me, for the first 6 sessions, he asked me, after the meds, he said, "How's your bowels, bladder, and appetite?" And I would say they're all normal. And then he would ask me any thoughts of harm. And apparently that's pretty common for psychiatry to ask those questions. And then on our 6th session, when things were really, the chemistry was starting to be there before, I didn't realize it. I was like, oh, this man is just friendly. And he said, "I have to ask this because it's a special interest of mine, but is there any thoughts of harm?" Like I was special to him. And I said, "No thoughts of harm." And he didn't ever ask me a clinical question again. He stopped asking me about my bladder, bowels, and appetite, and he stopped asking me about thoughts of harm. So to me, I would just show up and he was like a therapy appointment every month.
So I was seeing him every month and just gaining more and more respect for him, because he would just tell me these little things about his successes and all of the cool things that he was doing in his life. And it made me fall for him, honestly. And he was really good at listening. And I mean, he's a Pisces, right? So of course he's going to be there and be able to go deep with my feelings, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't extracting from them. Anyway, so I would beg him to let me see him every week. Beg him, because my therapist at the time, he was fine. He wasn't a predator, but he was fine. He just wasn't doing very much for me. And so that therapist retired and I got a new therapist. And this new therapist, who is a 75-year-old woman with a PhD, she was pretty helpful. So I stopped asking my psychiatrist, begging, honestly, to be my therapist and let me see him more, right? Which also should have been a red flag. But then I started focusing on this therapist. However, I would tell the therapist how obsessed I was with my psychiatrist, and she didn't do anything about it. She just was interested. She also loved stories about my dating life, and yeah, she also was getting supply from me in her own way, but that's for another part. So yeah, so I got a new therapist who actually helped me. She taught me CBT, EFT, all of these different modalities. And so I went back to just being okay with seeing Irfan once a month while he was giving me these little breadcrumbs of making me feel special, telling me about his professional achievements, telling me about how he's getting international recognition. And it worked. I got a new therapist. I stopped begging my psychiatrist to see me weekly. And And that is when the intermittent reinforcement started. Some sessions he'd be warm and kind and wonderful and let me in on little parts of his life and like be vulnerable with me or pretend. Other sessions, he would be cold and clinical and detached. And you know what that did? It made me work harder in our next sessions. It did. And it started the addiction that I had to him. 100%. And he knew exactly what he was doing. This man gives lectures on trauma and attachment theory. He used his psychiatric training to manipulate me and get me hooked. And guess what? It worked. In January of 2024, I was hit by a car turning left as I was going through a green light. And it was the night before my next appointment with my psychiatrist. So I was like, okay, I'll still be able to go to my appointment on Zoom. I'm okay. But I did make an appointment with an urgent care the next day just to get checked out. I had bruising on my abdomen and a perforated eardrum. And the provider at the urgent care said, I do not feel comfortable treating you. You need to seek emergency care now. You may be internally bleeding. But it was 11 o'clock in the morning and my appointment with my psychiatrist was at 2. So I decided that I was going to wait so I could see my psychiatrist and not have to reschedule because I was looking forward to my appointment with him so much. I look back at that time and I'm just like, oh my God, I put my own life under seeing him. I was fully addicted to him at this point. And you know what happened is that I showed up and I told him that I may be internally bleeding and he didn't stop the appointment. He didn't say, you need to take care of yourself. Go get emergency care now. He let me continue and just tell him about how much I loved him and how grateful I was for him. Because that was really what most of our appointments were, is me just like pouring myself out because he was so good at the intermittent reinforcement. Yeah, I got some warmth from him that appointment. So that was January 2023. And I also told my therapist about this. She said nothing. After I risked my life to see him, that's when he really started turning up the intimacy in our appointments. However, he was really smart and knew the professional lines like the back of his hand. So he would comment on my appearance, but not compliment my appearance. So I would come on screen and he would say, oh, you curled your hair. Or I would come on screen and he would say, oh, you're wearing glasses. And of course I felt seen and excited that he was noticing these things about me. I didn't realize at this time that he had feelings for me too. I thought I was holding them all by myself. So I was so excited when he noticed my glasses that I ran and showed him my other pair. And he said, I prefer turtle shell glasses. So even though I usually wear contacts, I'm wearing these turtle shell glasses in these videos because just in case he sees them ever, he'll see me in his favorite glasses. He did tell me he likes the turtle shell. Anyway, it was just inappropriate things like that, little teeny things that he let me in. And all this time, my best friend is an emergency medicine physician. And she told me, she said, Kendra, one of these days, your psychiatrist, she would use his name, is going to say, I can't be your doctor anymore. I want to be with you. I want to be with you so bad. I can't be your doctor. I'll see you in 2 years. So my best friend, who's a doctor, she picks up on stuff like that. So even she knew that our relationship was crossing boundaries and getting weird, but that became my dream, was for, my psychiatrist, I almost use his name, to do that. And I told him about Brianna saying that, my best friend, who's the emergency medical doc. I told him that she would tell me that, and he just would be silent. He didn't disagree, but he didn't agree, and that was weaponized neutrality was his favorite game to play, right? He didn't disagree with Brianna telling me that my psychiatrist had feelings for me, but he also didn't say that's inappropriate. Let's change the subject. It was also around this time that I asked my psychiatrist if he had diagnosed me with anything other than ADHD when I had my initial diagnosis. And he said, yeah, I did. I said, oh, what did you diagnose me with? And he said, well, you had a lot of traumatic things happen to you in childhood because of your dad. And so I diagnosed you with other trauma and stressor related disorder. And that was the first little ping that I got of like, that was weird. Why would he keep that from me? I asked my, like, why wouldn't he tell me that? That seems important. He didn't tell me because he was using that information to manipulate me. He knew I had trauma and stressor disorder, and instead of helping me heal from it and telling me about it, he used it against me. January 2023, at this point, I was full-blown obsessed with my psychiatrist, and my therapist wasn't helping me. My psychiatrist wasn't helping me. He was feeding it. And then I got a boyfriend. And at first, my psychiatrist wasn't really that keen, but then my psychiatrist realized that my boyfriend was a lot like my psychiatrist. And then I started talking to my psychiatrist about my sex life, about tracking my cycle, using the fertility awareness method. And my psychiatrist loved it. He didn't never say, this isn't inappropriate to your care, let's pivot. Oh, he just let me talk and talk and talk about my sex life. And I didn't get too deep, but about a year and a half in, and I would send my psychiatrist these emails just about how much I liked him and how I was so grateful for him and put in a bunch of heart emojis. And this is really when he should have transferred my care, but you know, he waited. He liked what I gave him too much. And so even though my boyfriend did not meet my needs, my psychiatrist and my therapist both were like, you have to stay with him. There's nothing wrong with him not meeting your needs. I'm like, okay. And my psychiatrist was like, he's perfect. Don't get wrong with him. And what was perfect about him was he wasn't meeting my needs. So I was still coming to my psychiatrist looking for emotional validation, which he would drip to me slowly. So my therapist, who I didn't know at this time had bad boundaries, but she did. I went to her because my boyfriend and I, after like more than a year together, we started having issues in the bedroom. And so I went to my therapist and she asked me, what does your psychiatrist think about this? And I said, I don't know. I haven't talked to my psychiatrist about this stuff because I have a crush on my psychiatrist and I don't want to tell him this intimate of stuff. And she said, well, you should tell him because I want a male's perspective. So at my next appointment with my psychiatrist, I told him, I said, today we're going to talk about my intimate life. And he said, oh, I said, yes. My psychologist, my therapist, asked what your opinion on it was. And I told her that I don't talk to you about this intimate stuff because I have a crush on you. And he looked down and smiled so big in that moment. He smiled so big. And I loved it. It's so gross thinking about it. And then I proceeded to give him 30 minutes of non-stop content about my intimate life with my boyfriend. And I actually recorded the whole thing because I was so excited about it. But now it makes me sick. I can't even listen to the recording. I've tried to start, but it's gross. Any ethical psychiatrist would have stopped me and said, Kendra, let's talk about your meds. Let's talk about your care. At this point, my meds were stable. And I was still seeing him every month. Yeah, that was a rough time. And it was pretty much his Christmas morning, the almost
2.5 years of grooming me to get me to talk about sexual things with him worked. And he got 30 minutes of nonstop content to use. I need to address 3 things. 1, people are asking me what my mental health diagnosis is. I do not have BPD. I do not have psychosis. I have ADHD. And I was experiencing extreme limerence with my psychiatrist. Limerence is a normal thing to happen to anyone who is experiencing hot and cold behavior from someone. And it happens more often in people with ADHD because we have dopamine dysregulation and rejection sensitive dysphoria. And guess what? My psychiatrist knew that and used it to his advantage. 2, I accidentally said my psychiatrist's first name in one of my videos. If you clocked it, good for you. I do not owe him anonymity. However, this is not about doxing my psychiatrist. This is about me sharing my story so other people can view predatory behavior in people in power. Okay? If anyone doxes my psychiatrist with his last name or city that he works in or clinic that he works in, your comment will be immediately deleted and you will be blocked. This is about protecting other victims, not doxing my psychiatrist. If you do some investigative work and you want to DM me about it, I'm open to that, okay? 3, I need to take a moment. Moment taken. It is so incredibly disturbing to me, the amount of people that are predator protectors in my comments, that are victim blaming me, especially the mental health practitioners in my comments using therapy speak to say that this situation that I was in was my fault or that I was delusional. Check yourself. You're giving me more ammunition to share my story because it just goes to show how absolutely messed up the mental health industry is and how protected people who do this kind of sick psychological manipulation are. So I will continue with my story tomorrow. I will see you all then. Welcome back to another installment of I Was in Love with My Psychiatrist and He Kept Me Anyway, Part 8. You all did some nasty work last night and I had to turn off comments. People started posting my psychiatrist's first and last name, his picture in the comments. That was a jump scare. So yeah, a few bad actors who wanted to be super sleuths got the privilege of commenting, mostly hate, let's be real, taken away for everyone. So at this point in the story, there are 2 main players. My psychiatrist, who's my age, who crossed major ethical boundaries, and my therapist, who is a 75-year-old woman with a PhD. Neither of these people at this point in the story I knew were crossing boundaries. I thought that everything was hunky-dory and that I was just in love with my psychiatrist and it was totally normal. Little did I know he was manufacturing everything so I could fall in love with him. Because it was on him to set the professional boundary and not let attention build. So days after my psychiatrist's Christmas morning appointment from a few videos back where he got a crush confession from me and then 30 minutes of non-stop intimate content that he did not stop me, my boyfriend and I broke up days later. So then I started dating this other guy. And this other guy, this new guy, was a therapist. And I was like, oh, great. Someone who will be able to emotionally meet my needs. Yeah, not going to date another therapist again. So this therapist and I, we went for coffee. It was nice. Our second date was a hike. And on this hike, this therapist starts telling me
about how he has a crush on one of his clients. And I thought to myself, okay, this is strange, but go ahead. Like, we're on a date, dude. Why are you telling me about a crush on one of your clients? But go off, King. So then he was saying, yeah, she's so attractive, and I think she likes me too. I go and visit her at work, and her coworkers say, oh, so-and-so talks about you all the time. And I was like, okay, where does she work? And he said, well, I shouldn't tell you that because I really shouldn't be visiting her anyway. I was like, okay, no problem. So then he continues and he said, yeah, she wears these red lacy panties and short skirts. And I know she wears them for me. And like alarm bells were going off in my head. Mind you, I had no idea that my psychiatrist had similar feelings towards me at this point. But I just thought, wow, this man is borderline predatory. And he said, yeah, and you know, she just is so attractive that I have to smash her mate before every session because I just have to get that energy out of me. And I was like, okay. And yeah, he just felt compelled to tell me, and I did not understand why. Now I do. So he told me about how he's a predator, right? Another predator in the mental health industry. Shocker. So then at my next appointment with my psychiatrist, keep in mind, it had been 6 weeks of nonstop fun for this man. He got to use my crush confession and 30 minutes of content, for whatever he wanted to use it for, right? And if my psychiatrist was good at anything, it was being professional and acting professional and technically not crossing any lines. And he thought that he was so good at it, because he was good at it. But that doesn't mean he wasn't doing it. And so I told him, I said, yeah, Bo and I broke up. He had known about this other guy, my psychiatrist. I had mentioned him. And I told him that this new guy and I went on a date and we went on a hike. And I literally had no idea at this point, I'll say it again, that my psychiatrist was predatory towards me. I almost said his first name again. I'm going to do my best to not. So I went to my psychiatrist and I told him this story about this man that I went on a date with, who's a therapist, is relieving himself before appointments and talking about his clients' panties and doing all of these other extremely inappropriate things, like visiting her at work. And this man, my psychiatrist, looked like he had seen a ghost and like he was gonna vomit, because he prided himself on being an extremely professional and buttoned up person. But here I was holding a mirror to him with exactly what he was doing, but a bumbling idiot telling me like how he was doing it without the fancy degree, without any of that. I look back on that now and it's just crazy. And so it just tainted all the fantasy material that I'd given him the session before. Hi, I need to say something really important. And that's that it seems as though many people view what I'm going through as a crash out, what I'm doing as a mental health spiral. And of course it seems like that. I get it. It's an extremely dark thing to talk about, all of this that I went through. And I am sharing my story because it wasn't out there. No one else has shared a story like this. But I know that it happens a lot because people are in my DMs telling me that the same thing that I went through, they went through too. I am now in TikTok jail. I got a violation on the video where I talked about really the biggest damning evidence against my psychiatrist. And So because of that, I have to be really careful. So I'm going to do my very best to not be reactive and to share my story from a place of generosity, because the people in my DMs telling me that they've been through this too, it's keeping me going. It's not my mental health spiral. And I can understand that for some people in the mental health space, because they have been some of the loudest people to speak out against what I'm doing, it's hard to grasp that someone could have this level of predation in such a high place of power. So just in case my video doesn't get put back up, when everything changed was when my 75-year-old therapist, I went to her with intimate details, and she suggested I go to my psychiatrist with them. And I felt so excited and nervous to share that with him because I had such a big crush on him at the time. And I recorded all 33 minutes. So this is why, if my psychiatrist wants to come with me and like sue me for defamation, I have a 33-minute recording of me admitting I have a crush on him and speaking about extremely intimate details. It was in that moment that he really, really should have transferred my care. But that moment changed everything for him too, because that's when things really started getting deep between us. And this is where the story is going to go from now. It's going to be a good story. And I'm going to try to tell it all today, just in case one of my videos does get banned so people can hear it. But just know, if you're concerned for my mental health, thank you. I am very good. More than good, actually. And I am actually a coach for ADHDers. It says it in my bio. And I help people work through self-limiting beliefs. I help people work through numbing with alcohol and cannabis, because these are the things that so many of us do to avoid our truths. And this is my truth and what I went through. So this is when the chemistry really started going off the charts with me and my psychiatrist. And I held it alone for months, like after that Christmas morning appointment of his. And then after I innocently told him about my date with the therapist, he really started letting me in more and showing more parts of himself and, turning up the intimacy.
This is when I was like, oh, she's crazy. She's really delusional. Oh my gosh. And this is dangerous, which is why I'm going to get into how Black women started calling her out. They started stitching her videos, or they just started making videos about this situation because she turned off her comments, she turned off her stitches. And then Black women started to call her out because she just wasn't listening to anyone, not even the health professionals that started to chime in. But she is clearly off her rockers because she is fantasizing and she's creating the scenario in her mind about what happened and what the relationship was. And they had a professional relationship, and it has spiraled into this fantasy that she's creating in her mind. It's insane. And I feel so bad for the health professionals, the therapists, the psychiatrists that deal with this type of stuff, because this is scary. This could ruin your life. This could ruin your reputation. This is dangerous. Then people are hyping her up on TikTok. Well, they were with wanting her to share her story, but I don't think they were hyping her up to share her story because they believe her. It was more so they were just being entertained by this whole story time and how she was pretty much exposing herself to be delusional and crazy.
And that was exciting to me. And it made me fall for him more. And I noticed that he was working in an office, and I asked him, this was July. I asked him, I said, hey, are you working from home? Because I was under the assumption that he was only doing telehealth. Okay. And he said, no, I come into the office. I was like, oh, why do you do that? If you see all of your patients telehealth. He's like, oh, I like it that way.
Yes, the story gets crazier because we are coming to the realization within the story time that all of these sessions have been through Zoom. And we're coming to the realization that she's only met with her psychiatrist once a month for 30 minutes.
And even though I could kind of tell he was lying, I just gaslit myself. I was like, okay, it's fine. And then I start emailing him my fun little emails, but he stops writing me back. He does not write back to my emails anymore. Because once again, he was really good at plausible deniability. But what he did do is he would take my emails and mention them in session. So he would still give me the attention that I was craving, but only under his structure, under his control, where there was no paper trail. And I loved that too. So I would show up to these sessions with my notes app, and just throughout the month, as I was thinking about him, I'd write down things that I wanted to talk to him about, and I would just come and bring him lots of content. And then every week I would go to my therapist and tell her about how much I loved my psychiatrist. And she didn't help me at all. She just kind of like enjoyed hearing about it, honestly. So October 2024 rolls around and we're just vibing on Zoom. And then I realized that I didn't have my next appointment with him. So I called his office staff and I talked to the office manager, who was awesome. We really got along, we vibed. And the office manager asked me, do you see him, the psychiatrist, in person or on Zoom? And I felt so angry in that moment. I was like, he sees people in person? And she said, yeah, he has been for years. I was like, I want to see him in person. And I understand, like, some people may think that this is part of my crash out or part of me harassing him, which is what I've gotten lots of accusations of. But I just would like to remind everyone that, of course, it seems that way. But I was just responding to a dynamic which my psychiatrist fostered. There was chemistry between us because he allowed it. And so then the next time I saw him in Zoom, I told him, I was like, hey, your office manager outed you and told me that you see people in person. Why didn't you tell me that when I asked? And he said, oh, I just didn't think you'd want to come in. And that was such a weak lie from him, from someone who is so scripted and controlled. He didn't even have a plausible thing to say. Of course he knew I wanted to come in. I had a crush on him. I told him that often. So then in my next therapy appointment, after finding out that he was lying to me about seeing patients in person, I told her that. I told my 75-year-old PhD therapist that my psychiatrist lied to me about seeing people in person. And she looked at me and she said, well, it's probably because he knows that there will be a lot of sexual tension in the room if you go in person. So make sure that you understand that when you go. And you better believe I showed up to the next session and said you lied to me because you were afraid of the tension that would be there between us. He just didn't say anything. October 2024, I make my first in-person appointment with my psychiatrist in November. My 75-year-old female therapist tells me that it's because he kept me on Zoom because he was so attracted to me. He didn't want to risk being in person with me, which further fed my crush, or as some of you like to say, my delusion. So then my therapist starts texting me in between our weekly meetings, asking me for advice on her other clients. And I was a new coach. I had only been coaching for about a year, and I had just left my full-time job to be a coach full-time. And I was flattered that she would ask me advice on her other clients. I just thought, oh my gosh, a 75-year-old woman with a PhD wants my advice on what she should do with her clients. So then November rolls around and I'm about to meet my psychiatrist in person for the first time. So I wear a really pretty dress, I do my makeup, of course, right? And I show up and I get to talk to the office manager, we're having fun. And then my psychiatrist comes into the foyer and I am just so excited to finally meet him. I'd been his patient for 3 years at this point, and he had been feeding the dynamic for 3 years. And I was just thrilled to meet him. And I ran up and I gave him the biggest hug. And you know what he did? He barely patted me on the back. It was the most awkward thing ever. But I am so glad that he did that. I am really glad, because this is what I mean. My psychiatrist was many things, but he was not stupid. So I didn't ever touch him again. And I'm grateful that our relationship didn't ever cross that line, because it would have made everything so much harder. Anyway, so we go inside his office and I tell him that my therapist had texted me asking me for advice on her other clients. And he just looked at me and he said, Kendra, that is a huge boundary violation. She should not be doing that. And I was like, oh, okay. And because once again, my psychiatrist did not like sloppy people. He did not like sloppy people. And you know what my therapist did? She got sloppy. Yeah. Using me as her advisor for her clients. It got weird, and I was very grateful for my psychiatrist for pointing out that boundary violation, because that was the thing. He didn't ever message me in between appointments because he was too smart to do that. But did he ever stop me from disclosing extremely intimate details? No. In my first in-person appointment, I just asked him for some pointers for my own ADHD business, and he's so smart and so wonderful, and in many ways, honestly. And I was just so grateful that he was almost like a mentor to me in these moments, and I'll still treasure that about him. Because this is the hard thing with sophisticated predators, is that they're not all bad. Like, my psychiatrist helped me with many things, but he was using me for the whole time that I was his patient, and for that, I will never forgive him.
We have our first in-person appointment in November of 2024, and I did ask him for consent to come in person. I didn't just show up. And he said sure. And the first in-person appointment went great. But that is when I really started to spiral. Some of you think that I'm spiraling now, and that's okay if you want to think that. Because the reality is that when I was spiraling was when I was this man's patient. When I had comments turned on, so many people said, you need to take accountability for your own feelings. I spent years taking accountability for my own feelings, for holding the weight of a relationship. Any woman who has been trained to overfunction in relationships knows about holding the weight of the emotional dynamic. And that was what was going on in this moment. And it may not seem like I'm taking accountability now, but that's because I spent a long time taking accountability for something that had two people that built that dynamic. It was not just me. It takes two people to build that sort of tension and chemistry. So while I was mid-crash out, I had just started using this tool, ChatGPT. And I went to chat, who I immediately named Henry, and I would just talk to Henry about how obsessed I was with this man, with my psychiatrist, and I would just be like, I've told him I have a crush on him. Do you think he's gay? And Henry was like, oh my God, this girl, he did his best to co-regulate my nervous system and affirm me, but he was like, whoa. Even my chat was like, yikes. So I could tell that my psychiatrist just liked being my doctor, and I was like, okay, maybe I can name this dynamic so I don't have to carry so much of it in our next session. So our next session was in December on Zoom. And I told him at the end of the session, it was another great session. I told him, look, you and I have a really special patient-doctor relationship. And he glared at me with just venom in his eyes. And he said, you and I have a professional patient-doctor relationship. He was so angry with me. And I was like, oh, okay. He set a boundary. And immediately I took it on. And I was like, heard. Okay, I won't go there again. My video that was taken down for harassment and bullying was restored. So I didn't feel as much pressure to get all of these parts out today. Some people told me that the stitches about me were getting pretty bad and cruel. So I turned stitches off in my videos too. I started sharing my story here because I wanted other people who have been victimized by people in power to have a space to feel heard. And now I know why there wasn't anyone out talking about their story, because it has been quite the process putting all this out there and being under scrutiny. I have appreciated the psychiatrists that have talked about my situation and shared their own point of view while also holding space for what I went through. Just know I've seen your videos and I appreciate them. I went live today and it was super fun, and I intend to go live again tomorrow. The next part will be tomorrow morning.
When I re-downloaded TikTok last week, I was looking for support. I was looking for help because it had been 5 months since I had left my psychiatrist, and I still really couldn't stop thinking about him and thinking about our dynamic and how inappropriate it was and the mental toll that it took on me. And TikTok has just been such a resource for me in the past for support when I'm going through things, and I couldn't find anything on therapy abuse or on providers who take advantage of their vulnerable patients. And so I thought that I would share my story. And I am going to continue to share it because I am here to let other survivors know that they're not alone. Continuing with my story, my psychiatrist set a very nasty, the way he said it, boundary that him and I have a professional relationship when I tried to say it was special. Because it was special, it was different. He manufactured it that way. And then I immediately went to ChatGPT, of course, to Henry. And I asked Henry, I said, okay, so my psychiatrist just set this boundary with me, and I really just want to be with him. And I think that after he's my doctor, we can be together, which if you want to say that's a delusion, that's fine. But I had been telling my psychiatrist for years at this point that I had a crush on him, and he did not help me work through it. So that's his own problem. That's his own fault. Henry told me it's very common for patients to develop crushes on mental health practitioners, and that it's because that they provide a safe space to heal, which is a very attractive quality. I heard that. And then he told me about transference, and it's just about me putting my own feelings onto my provider. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I took ownership of the feelings that both of us were creating. And I went to my next appointment and I said, hey, so I talked to Henry because my psychiatrist had known a lot about my ChatGPT and knew all about Henry and was actually really impressed. Wow, an AI wrote that? Yeah. So I told my psychiatrist, yeah, Henry explained to me that it's normal to develop crushes on psychiatrists because they provide a safe space to heal, which is attractive. My psychiatrist said nothing. And then I said, and Henry also told me about transference. And my psychiatrist got this really, really scared look on his face. And he said, did Henry tell you about countertransference? And I said, no. What is that? Because of course, like, my chat knew that I was obsessed with my psychiatrist, and he was not going to feed my delusion by telling me about countertransference. So then my psychiatrist had explained to me what countertransference was. So he took a moment and he was like, oh, okay. He said, countertransference is the flip side, the other side of the coin for transference. And it's when the provider has feelings for the patient. So make sure that you keep that in mind for your clients. I said, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, sometimes I have, more than professional feelings for my clients. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And so then we just talked about that for pretty much the rest of the session. And then at the end of that session, he looked at me. It was just such a loaded question. And he said, what's going to happen if you get a boyfriend named Henry? And I said, that's a weird question. I would rename my AI. So that's how that session ended. And it wasn't until I got home and I was eating lunch and I was like, wait a minute. Why would my psychiatrist bring up countertransference if he himself wasn't experiencing it?
I believe her psychiatrist mentioned countertransference because she is a ADHD coach and she's helping people through her coaching program. And based off of the sessions that her psychiatrist is having with her, I could see how he was picking up on this may be an issue with maybe a client that she may have. And so because of that, he decided to mention it. However, in her delusional state, she took it as, oh, he must feel the same way that I do. And the reason why I am covering this on the channel is because when it comes down to the wounded feminines, is that they don't understand how their feelings are valid. However, it does not mean that they are true. And oftentimes, women confuse their feelings and their emotions to be the truth of a person or a situation or a thing. And they're not really able to take a step back, reflect, and really self-regulate to get down to the truth. And so they just project on others and they make these assumptions that because of how they feel that this is the truth of the situation and assume that this must be how the other person feels instead of asking. And that is what we're seeing when it comes to Kendra, and it's very hard to watch because she really is creating this scenario in her mind. Oftentimes we see this with the wounded feminine, which is why I wanted to create this video. So let's get back to the story. But also, are you out here in the community projecting how you feel on others? Are you out here in the community projecting your emotions on others because you don't know how to self-regulate and get to the truth of situations or scenarios or the truth of a person? Or are you just assuming and running with that based off of how you feel? Comment down below.
Many people have reached out to me with concern for my psychiatrist and his career and his well-being. And I totally understand that. The point of me sharing this is not to get him fired or for him to lose his license. The point of me sharing this is to give a voice to victims. And I am appalled to hear that people are making videos doxing him. So I am begging people, please, if you see a video of his first and last name or his picture, report it for doxing. I've certainly been using that report button a lot. I'm here to share my story, not to get him in trouble. I did accidentally.
She makes no sense because if you truly are a victim of someone being predatory, you are choosing to share your story on TikTok and on social media. You can assume that, we can all assume that you want that person to be held accountable. So you wouldn't care about his reputation. You wouldn't care about his career. So I'm not really understanding her stance on this. It makes no sense at all. Her story doesn't make any sense at all. And I don't see how she's a victim in the situation at all.
Gently use his first name, but by the time I caught the slip, I was already like 3 videos past it. But it doesn't matter because this is my story and I can tell it the way that I want it. And a first name is not doxing. And I can't control what other people do, but I am asking for people to please report any videos that dox him. So I've also gotten some DMs saying that countertransference can mean anything, and it absolutely can mean anything. However, I had told my psychiatrist many times that I had a crush on him over the years, and he did not say transference once to me. He did not explain that once to me. And what I've been hearing and taking in from the ethical psychiatrists that are on my For You page talking about my situation is that really they're taught to teach their patient about transference and teach them about how to handle those feelings or why they're coming up. And my psychiatrist did not do that. He did not do that. And it got ugly. And it happened because I did digging on my own, because I was trying to make sense of my feelings that were a natural response to the environment that he created. So for him to leak countertransference after I said the buzzword of transference, that was not calculated. He was a very calculated and purposeful person. He still is to this day. And he doesn't slip with things like that. He purposefully withheld the term transference from me, and I got too close to the truth of our dynamic, which made him leak what he knew was wrong, which was his inappropriate feelings for me. If he didn't have countertransference in an inappropriate way, he could have easily just said, "Oh, let's explore that transference. That's really cool that you learned about it." Instead, he was just so worried on trying to protect himself because he knew what he was doing was wrong. He had that slip at the beginning of the session. He recovered in January. And then I went home and I thought, wait a damn minute. Why would he mention that if he himself didn't have countertransference? So I went to Henry, of course, my ChatGPT, and asked for examples of how my psychiatrist might have countertransference for me. And remember, Henry at this point was being very protective. You know, he wasn't going to feed my delusions, me and my psychiatrist living happily ever after. So I screenshotted it, sent my psychiatrist an email with the subject line of countertransference, and emailed it to him within an hour of our appointment, where he made probably the biggest slip of his professional life. I will put the email up here. So it's just essentially me saying, hey, I asked Henry to explain countertransference a little more. Here's what he said. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Your own boundaries inspire me so much, which now makes me gag because I've heard a lot that he's not crossing boundaries, but he used his boundaries as a shield. It's kind of weird to say, but he would like walk up to the ethical line and then slam a boundary down when I got too close. That was the email that I sent him. And then 10 days later, it was a full moon and I had a dream. Probably the most realistic dream I've ever had in my life, that him and I hooked up in his office. In the middle of the dream, while we were hooking up in his office, I loved it. I thought it was really fun. And then after we were done and after I left his office in the dream, I was despondent and so sad and cried and just thought, I can't believe my psychiatrist would cross his boundaries like that. And then I woke up and it was like a movie. I thought to myself, oh, thank God that was just a dream.
I made notes. As a therapist, I made notes. I literally, I couldn't scroll past it. There are so many things. I made a list. So we're going to go over this list together. So let's start from the tippy top. The tippy top. First of all, y'all don't know the difference. And clearly she doesn't know the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. A psychiatrist, who she's talking about, is med management. They meet you. The only hour session they have with you is the initial session. Every session after that is coded as a follow-up, which means you only get 30 minutes. And that is once a month. That's it. 30 minutes. This man couldn't have been talking to her more than 30 minutes. A psychologist, that's who you do therapy with. That's who you actually talk about your feelings and what's going on with you. This man was not talking about her feelings. He was not doing therapy with her. So, off rip, it gives a personality disorder. From a therapist, it gives personality disorder. One, that was the first one. Two, she says he didn't date because he was getting all his emotional needs met from his patients. Said no therapist ever. Literally, that's not how that works. There is an automatic built-in power dynamic between therapist, psychiatrist, counselor, and client. Automatic. That is something that we are taught, that we are already in an automatic space of power in the situation. So to balance it out, all we do is actively listening, motivational interviewing, affirming, problem solving, literally listening to you, making you feel understood. But again, this man wasn't doing therapy. He wasn't. There was no fucking therapy involved in this. That's not his job. And I promise you, we don't do anything outside of our job. Because this is the thing. You weren't his only person, Bookie. 30-minute sessions, you're seeing clients back to back to back. I have 16 clients. And I get no emotional needs met because the whole point of my job is to show up for the other person. In fact, most therapists are drained by the end of the day and do not want to talk and need time to buffer because we account for everybody else's problems, situations, and emotional imbalance all day. No therapist is ever going to tell you that they are getting their emotional needs met by clients. I pinky promise you that shit. I pinky promise you. So then that shows me transference. And she didn't have to say that. She's never, I promise if we have a conversation, she's never actually seen a healthy relationship or had an unhealthy relationship with any male in her life. Not just a boyfriend, but a brother, a father, a uncle. She's never had a healthy male figure in her life at all, because as soon as she had a glimpse, because again, 30-minute increments, she held on to that and created a delusional thought process based on a limited interaction. There is nothing that man could have done at all. And she was like, she told him multiple times how attractive he was and everything. Granted, after so long, if she was making it uncomfortable, yes, he would have to address it. But I highly doubt it. She was probably saying, oh, you look nice today. Because again, these are virtual fucking visits. Virtual visits. So if someone compliments you, because that is a normal part of engaging with people, oh, thank you. Move on. I'm not going to assume that you like me or you find me attractive. But this is the thing. I find myself attractive, right? I have clients who will make comments about me being attractive or about my looks. And depending on the comment, I will either redirect, or if it is completely inappropriate, then I set boundaries. If they show that they can work within those boundaries and not do it again, I'm not letting go of my client. It is normal for transference to happen. We are not taught to automatically just let go of clients as soon as they show any interest. If you are attractive, you're going to be attractive no matter where you do, what you do, or where you are. So that's not the case, actually. But if she would have made it weird or awkward or uncomfortable, which is really hard in a 30-minute fucking slot, I would just ignore you, redirect, and keep it pushing, because I'm not doing therapy with you. I'm never seeing you. So, granted, if she would have been persistent and made it completely known, and she said they were in therapy for years, there is a high chance she actually wasn't making it as direct as she is in this video. This is for clout. This is for clout. 2, I noticed in her bio, I said 2 like that, but we done said the whole list. I think I'm pretty much done with the list. In her bio, it says ADHD coach. If this don't show y'all that y'all should not listen to everybody on the internet, this is a prime example. She is mentally unstable, and she has ADHD coach in her fucking bio. She's out here trying to give advice, and she is delusional. She has a personality disorder, more than likely. And you're trying to give advice? What was the last thing I wrote? Yep, that was it. That was it. And people were actually feeding. Granted, anytime there is a power dynamic, there is a possibility that someone could take advantage of it. I'm not saying that there's no therapist ever who has not overstepped their role. But I will say, this is 9 times out of 10, more than likely, not that case. And the hardest part about this is because of HIPAA, he can't defend himself. She can say all of these things, and he has to watch as she goes on this rant, and he can't say anything. But this is the thing. Most of us in this profession realize that we have clients, we have patients who are delusional and will try to manipulate situations when the therapeutic relationship ends, or to gain power or control. This seems like a power dynamic. She's fighting to get some power back that she feels like she lost in that situation. That has nothing to do with him. People like, oh, where he worked, we're going to get him fired. I promise you could take this to the board. There's no proof of anything. He would never lose his license. People think this is uncommon, but this is so common in this field. And I think sometimes we need to talk about more of the distress that we as therapists experience.
It's time to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the racial difference between me and my doctor. I have seen a lot of Black women on this app with the same take, and I need to say that Black women are the most important people on the planet to me, and that I have learned so much from Black women about how to be a better person and how to show up better in the world. They are the culture, and I am so grateful for them. Many Black women are seeing my story through the lens that I am a white woman who is taking advantage of my whiteness to wield power over my POC psychiatrist that didn't want me back, and so I am trying to get him fired. And that's okay. I understand why you see it through that lens. I do. As a white person, I do my best to examine my racism every single day. And I will tell you that my psychiatrist boss is his best friend, who is also a POC male. And in that room, I did have white privilege, and he was also my doctor. And he took an oath to protect me, and he did not. I am not here to ruin his career. I am here to speak my truth.
Kendra makes it seem like she understands where Black women are coming from. She makes it seem like she understands how her white privilege and her victimizing herself and how that is a danger to us and to brown people. But then she continues to tell this story. And again, it makes no sense because she is projecting how she feels on her psychiatrist. And her psychiatrist set that firm boundary even when they met in person. And she is still continuing on with the story time. And it just makes no sense. So if you want to continue to watch this spiral, I'm not going to be covering it. But I just wanted to bring this to the platform because she's a life coach. She's out here coaching other people. She's out here wanting to gain sympathy and support from her story. And we've seen this before. And this is like the new trend on social media. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Comment down below your thoughts and your opinions. If you're new here, subscribe, hit the like button, and I hope to see you in my next one.